Oh, my grade school people, what's going on, everybody? Happy grade school Thursday. When's the last time we did a grade school on a Thursday? I don't know. It's been a while. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see you guys. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Is all of the technology working in our favor? Have the gods aligned? Is Mercury in? Oh, my buddy Annie's here with me. Annie, what's the opposite of retrograde, or what is it? What is there a word for when you're not in retrograde, like when the
That's a
planets?
great question.
I don't know why
I
I
think
think you
it's
should
just,
automatically know that, but I do.
I also feel like I should know that. I would just say it's out of retrograde, but
Yeah,
I'm going to look this up
Is,
eventually. There's
is
going to
is
be,
Mercury in retrograde, out of retrograde? That like my wife always tells me that's gonna have big impact on my technology, and I always go, "Honey, that's ridiculous," and then it
it's
always
real. It's
seems to.
real.
Yeah, it's
It's real.
it's real. This is gonna be
But
a
I
very
don't
different
think we're in
type of.
retrograde.
This is going to be a very different type of grade school this morning, everybody. We're going to be talking about astrology and its high impact on the field of color grading. Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be with you guys. We're going old school today. We're going straight up AMA style. My brain is filled with the Colorist Career Accelerator course, which is kicking off tomorrow. Where are my CCA alums? Where are my CCA participants who are going to be in class tomorrow? Let me know in the chat. By the way, we're trying out a lower latency mode here in YouTube today. So, guys, let me know how the quality is doing, and we're going to find out how the liveness, the latency-ness is doing here, because I would love to be able to have a little bit less of that than we usually do. Okay, audio is a little bit low on me, Chris, compared to Annie. Let me know. Yeah, Nicholas. Why? Good morning. Good evening. Indeed, I've been doing some work with a couple different clients and parties in Australia lately. That's a bonkers time zone stretch. I've had to stretch almost everywhere else in the world, but only once or twice with Australia. There's like a 20-minute window where it's even reasonably convenient for both parties. And any other time it's like, oh cool, 10 a.m. Well, great. That's 1 in the morning for me. It's always like something ridiculous. Anyway, I digress. Okay, cool. Okay. Early reports of good quality. Cool. All right, let's see those hands, guys. Let me know. Okay, Fabio is going to be in CCA tomorrow. I'm so pumped. Who else? Where are my CCA alums at? I see at least a couple of y'all who are hiding out. Raise that flag, man. Let me know. I'm excited. Anyway, we're getting ready for CCA tomorrow. It's going to be a great round of the Colorist Career Accelerator. If you weren't able to join this time, don't worry. We're going to be doing another round of it at least once more this year. So stay tuned, and we will keep you posted when we're ready to do that next round. But for all of you guys who are going to be with me tomorrow, I'm super pumped. And because my brain is really focused on those things, today we're going freestyle. We're going AMA. Whatever you guys want to talk about, I'm game to talk about, other than, of course, my secret smoothie recipe, which I will never divulge to anyone ever. Let's get started. Does anyone have anything they really want to talk about in the world of color grading, in the world of Resolve? By the way, before we dive in, I'm not in Resolve 20 yet, so I can't speak much to the beta. I've played around with it a little bit, but I'm going to wait for it to come out of beta and then start playing a little bit more seriously with those tools, and that'll be a better point to talk about Resolve 20 if that's top of mind for you guys. But whatever else you got in mind, let's go.
All right, we have a question here. Any idea about OCIO workflow with VFX that Resolve 20 is now supporting?
Yeah, that's a little bit out of my normal lane. I know that OCIO support is one of the big things that they were blasting when they were announcing Resolve 20, so it sounds like it's going to be better, but definitely not anything I've touched hands on, so can't speak to it much as of yet anyway. Maybe a good thing to circle back on in a couple weeks, and we can talk more about that.
Okay, have you graded any 12K Blackmagic footage lately? If yes, how do you like grading it?
I have not graded any 12K Blackmagic footage lately. No, I don't think I've graded any 12K Blackmagic footage at all. I've graded the other varietals from the, like I've done a fair amount of like the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, which can produce a great image, but no, none of the 12K stuff. If I were to do it, you guys know my story here. Let's look at some Resolve. The fundamental approach would be the same. You guys know Okay, guys, I'm going to figure out my sound. Hang tight 1 minute here. Okay, there we go. Should be live now. You guys let me know if not. So, as I was very excitedly saying, if I were to be grading Blackmagic 12K footage from is it the Ursa? I don't even remember. Whatever the 12K footage is that you're maybe thinking about a use case for grading, here would be my approach. My approach is going to be fundamentally the same no matter what the camera is, because I like to work not in a camera-centric modality, but in a what type of centric modality. Someone let me know. We just talked about this past week in my last YouTube video. Not camera-centric, but someone's got this. I'm going to keep you guys on the spot. Who's been paying attention? Not camera-centric, but what? This is one of the biggest things that you can do mentally with your mental model in terms of what you bring to color grading. 5, 4. There we go. I knew someone had it. Ben's got it. Daniel's got it. This is also giving me a little bit of a sense for how much latency we've got. So yes, exactly. I like to work not in a camera-centric, but in an image-centric modality. Does that mean all cameras are the same and we can completely null out the difference between them with a simple input transform? No. What that does mean, however, is by the time I'm putting hands on the wheels and I'm starting to grade, I don't want to be thinking about the camera. Whatever limitations I'm going to bump into of like, oh, this camera had a rolling shutter. This camera clipped out early in the highlights. This camera has a high noise floor. Like that stuff I'm just going to see when I start grading the footage, and I'm going to respond accordingly when I'm grading. But that doesn't mean I want to be using a different system or different solutions every time. I want a system or solutions. This is what we talked about in our last grade school, that is large enough to encompass all of the different variables. Remember what we talked about? My definition of a system in our last episode of grade school. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, I definitely recommend checking it out. This is where I broke down the colorist operating system, so-called. The idea of a system for me is that it is a large set of parameters that never change, that is large enough to enclose all the things that do change from project to project, okay? So I want to have a grading workflow that doesn't change depending on the camera. It stays the same. That's another very long way of saying I like to work in an image-centric form as opposed to a camera-centric form. So if I were to do that with Blackmagic footage, I would go into my camera raw. Let's assume that this is coming from a raw format like Blackmagic RAW, if it's coming from that camera. And I'm going to decode as follows. We'll do project, color science, typically going to do Gen 5. This, by the way, is exactly how I decode like my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera as well, or whomever's Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. Mine's not special. White balance as shot is great. Color space and gamma. This is sort of funny to me. These things are not that easy to correlate, color space and gamma, if you just leave them at Blackmagic Design and Blackmagic Design Film. They're not that easy to correlate with which Blackmagic Design color space and gamma do they correspond to in a color space transform. For that reason, and because there's no disadvantage to it anyway, I decode directly into my working space. DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate. This is the exact same thing as if you were to decode into any other space. What an inopportune time to get a phone call. I don't need that right now. Actually, if you guys can believe it, it's a celebrity. It's Dr. Mitch Bogdanowicz. I'll call him back later. If we look at our color space here, decoding into DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate directly is the exact same thing as decoding into Blackmagic whatever, and doing a color space transform. The only difference is I don't have to sit there and scratch my head at the color space transform and try to figure out which color space is going to correspond in the CST to what the camera raw controls call very generically Blackmagic Design. So that's my workflow there. Highlight recovery. I've had sometimes luck turning it on. I'll usually only turn this on if I feel like I need to for a shot. Gamut compression I'm going to leave off. Apply LUT I'm going to leave off. That's the system. That's how I'm going to unpack that 12K footage into my grading space. And then from there, I'm just going to grade forward and work in that image-centric format that I'm talking about. Hope that gives some general principle anyway, in lieu of more specific guidance on that particular camera.
All right, question here. I recently started my videography journey, and color grading is a thing I get overwhelmed a bit too quick. Any primary things I should first focus on when color grading? Keeping it simple.
Oh, yeah. Primary things you should focus on when color grading. This is such a great question to ask. This is the question we should all be asking all the time when we're color grading. Really, another way to put this is like, okay, if I only got to do one more thing from where I'm at, whether I'm an expert colorist at the tail end of a project, whether I'm a newer colorist at the very beginning of a project, what's the next most impactful thing I could do going to be? Such a good question to ask. That's, in a way, the only question that we want to be asking when we're color grading. So what we want to figure out for you is, what is the next most impactful thing that you are going to be able to do in your grading process? If, let's say, you're starting from zero, you don't have a high level of knowledge or experience necessarily yet, and you want to have the greatest impact on your outcomes. I'm going to let you guys guess to yourselves. I won't leave it to the room or I'm not going to poll the room on this, but everyone kind of take a guess to yourselves. What do you think the answer to this is going to be for a newer colorist looking to make the biggest impact on their end result with as little sort of like detour into like having to do complex learning or implementing complex adjustments as they are going along there? Think to yourselves for a second. Here's what I'm going to say. We're about to talk about this in depth over the next 3 days in the Colorist Career Accelerator, talking tomorrow. I talked about this in an Instagram story, I think, recently as well. One of the most challenging, interesting things about being a colorist is like what we do here, what we're doing at the wheel. So guys can't see my hands, and you don't really need to see Resolve right now anyway. So I'm going to go back over here. What we do here at the controls, I guess you still can't see my control surface, but trust me, it's there. I swear, I'm not making up my desk or my control surface. What we do here is far less important. I'm not even going to say far less important. It's a narrow part of a much larger process, our imaging pipeline. How do we get from the linear encoding of the data that hit the camera sensor all the way out to the light coming off the screen hitting our eyes? That's really the interval that we are interested in as motion imaging creatives, right? Color grading is just like one volume on that bookshelf, right? There's lots of other books on that bookshelf. So the number one thing that you can do to circle it all, to put a circle around all of it and make it simple, the number one thing that you can do is actually to put off color grading a little bit and first get a good grasp of how am I going to navigate that journey for my image? How am I going to get my image from its camera state out to its display state? What am I talking about when I say that? I'm talking about color management. That's what I would recommend learning at first, because it's not something that requires your taste or requires hours at the wheel to get good at, as color grading does. It's well worth that time, but that's going to take you more time. The number one next most impactful thing that you're going to be able to do for the least amount of time, another way of putting this is the way I put it in my book, The Colorist 10 Commandments, greatest gains for least effort. Greatest gains for least effort for you at your point is going to be getting a really solid grasp of color management. And then from there, you're going to start looking at what can I do for my overall look within that color management pipeline. And then if you're ready to go forward from there, that's where we will start working our fundamentals of color grading, things like our lift, gamma gains, offsets, balance, exposure, contrast, all that stuff. But that's really another chapter in the journey. Start with that color management pipeline. If you nail that, start working forward to implementing your look. All this is stuff that I talk about a ton here on the channel, so you should have a good resource to get you started on those things. That's what I would focus on, and then work forward from there into your fundamentals of grading. Hope that helps.
Okay, I just watched a video of yours talking about linear gain for balance. How can you use that on multiple shots and have them match each other? And does linear gain work the same in any working color space?
Ooh, good question. So we got a two-parter here. Let's go back over into Resolve for a second here. So the first question is, how can we use linear gain? If I'm understanding the question, Annie, you can check me on this. The question is basically, how can I use linear gain to match between shots? Am I getting that right? The first part?
I believe so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so, I mean, let's look at some setups here. Like, let's look at, I don't know. I'm looking at some footage that, by the way, for my CCA crew who are going to be with me this weekend, we're going to be looking at this footage. We're going to be grading this footage. I'll be grading it. You'll be grading it. It's going to be a blast. I'm trying to find some stuff that needs a little bit of matchy-matchy work. Let's see if we can find it. This stuff's all flowing too well. Cinematographer friends who generously donate your footage to me for use in courses and in grade school, stop doing a good job. Start doing a worse job so that I have something that I can illustrate with. Well, we can talk about it in the abstract anyway. Or you know what? Let's do this. Let's go to another project we'll be looking at in CCA this weekend that maybe we'll have a little bit more matching for us to do. So, by the way, let's take a 5-second sort of like path into what we're about to do and illustrate what I was just talking about in the prior question about like what's the next most impactful thing going to be to do for a beginner colorist who's looking to level up their grades and is not really ready to like spend a gajillion hours learning something new in order to get a small increase in quality of final product. So here's what that looks like practically. I've got this at my baseline. I've got a log C3 image. Let's go to something that's a little bit more kind of normal base exposure. I've got a log C3 image. I'm piping that or transforming that log C3 image into my working space. This goes back to our earlier question still where I was talking about image-centric versus camera-centric. I'm moving into a working space so that my controls feel the same regardless of where the camera, what the original camera was. So that's step one of that pipeline that I talked about. Step two, at the other end, is my output transform. I'm using my friend JP's $24.99 output transform. This is basically a fancy replacement for what could otherwise be a Resolve color space transform. Something like this. Okay, so you could use this. I'm going to use JP's thing because I like it a lot more. That's my basic technical pipeline, my basic bare minimum that I need to get out to display. Here's where I've landed. Here's where I started with the camera. So you can see like when I talk about greatest gains for least effort, man, that's a very improved image very, very fast just by knowing what boxes to tick, right? From here, before we move forward into looking at some matching exercises, let's drop a look into place. I'm going to grab something from my Contour Look Dev plugin. Everybody using Contour? Everybody played around with it? If you haven't played around with it, if you're curious about this tool, it's pretty rad. You can check it out for free. There's a link to it in the description in today's video. So now I've got my film look in place for Contour here. And now we can take a look at doing some matching. So let's find, I don't know, maybe one of these. Yeah, even still, we're feeling pretty matchy. Yeah, I'm trying to find a specific example so that I can prove to you what I'm about to say. And the specific example is eluding me. So I'm gonna skip past looking for that specific example for now. The fun thing that you're gonna find when you're grading with linear gain, matching is one of the most valuable things that you can, that one of the places where you're gonna see the most value in switching over to linear gain. Because as I talk about in, I think every video where I talk about linear gain is really doing, if it's working for you, or rather if balancing with using offset or balancing using your lift gamma and gain, for example, if those are working for you and if you're getting good results, and you definitely can, but if those are working for you and if you're getting good results, they are coming at a cost. That cost might be obvious. That cost might be a little trickier to spot, but what that cost is a non-uniform change in the image. So I demoed this in one of the linear gain videos that I did recently, where we look at, the response in the low end of the image when I use offset, which is like everyone's favorite tool, like, I'm all about the printer points, I'm all about the offsets. And I'm like, I'm all about the concept of offsets, but the actual tool of offsets working in any log curve that we actually grade in, not so much, because we get too fast of a response in the shadows. So if I am, let's see here. I'm just going to use these examples that I was bouncing between a minute ago. So if I'm working here, I'm going to use one of my node trees that I've got set up over here. And let's actually do it the wrong way. Let's look at offset. And let's say, for example, that like our balance is going to encompass both a creative and a preferential manipulation. So I'm going to cool this off like quite a bit. Okay. So let's say that's my new baseline. If I land on another shot and I want to impart this sort of like dual creative and technical adjustment, if it needs the same thing, that's going to work out great. But if there's a different correction that's needed for the shot before that creative look gets applied, that's where offset really gets tricky. Because like if we graph this, let's just do it real fast here. I'm going to copy this node, wipe everything out. We're going to pull up a grayscale ramp here, my favorite visualization tool. I'm going to bring this height up a little bit. Let's look at this balance node. Let's turn everything else off. I'm going to bring my waveform up for you guys, like so. So check this out. You can see with this offset adjustment that I'm making, do I have everything else turned off here? Yeah, so with this offset, I'm getting actually not the result that I expect to see at all, guys. CK, take a seat. You don't know what you're talking about. Hang tight 1 second. Let me figure out what's looking weird. Let me check my, I think Dolby Vision or HDR Vivid might be not doing me some favors. Let's find out. No, that's not it. Okay. You know what? My bad. This was set into linear because I like to do balance and linear, as we were talking about. It's like, why is that looking bizarre? So back to the point that I was trying to make. Let me just paste that same adjustment, but then fix the gamma so that it's in my normal log. So check this out. You can see as I'm adjusting this, it's adjusting everything, as opposed to linear gain, which is only going to adjust. It's going to leave my floor pinned, like so. So here's linear gain. You can see it's kind of like diverging out from a common starting point. So what that's going to do is ensure that you don't have this like hard to follow, hard to trace X factor in the low end of the image, that like if two different images need two different adjustments to get them to the same net end result, you're going to have a really hard time doing that with offset, because offset doesn't have uniform response in the image. It responds too fast in the bottom relative to the rest of the image. Does that make sense? I went on a bit of a tangent there, but just to like kind of put a bow on it, one of the main reasons we want to use linear gain over something like offset, which is usually the big sort of like competing candidate people will put up against it, is because offset has too much effect on the shadows compared to the rest of the image. So if we need two different amounts of offset to get two images to match to each other, that means we have imparted too much of that adjustment in the low end in one shot versus the other, and it gets really tough to match them in. Whereas with linear gain, it's much easier. So this is all a very long way of saying, how do you match two shots together using linear gain? Exactly as you would using any other scheme, except you're going to get better results and it's going to feel easier and it's going to go faster. So that's the kind of like overall summary there. Just give it a try. Like matching is one of the things that I find the most advantageous to do in linear gain as opposed to using offsets, because I'm getting that consistent uniform response that even if I need to do two different amounts of RGB gain in linear for shot A versus shot B, I can get to the same end result, and the behavior up and down the tone scale is going to be consistent. Hope that helps.
Okay. Could you give some insight on getting a better feel for how much is too much? Be that contrast or saturation, crushing shadows too much, etc.
Oh, yes. This is a great question. So how much is too much? I was just thinking about this yesterday when I was in a grading session. Here's one of my sort of like guardrails that I put against too much. I don't give myself the opportunity to decide that shot after shot, session after session, day after day. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So if we think about like, okay, I'm grading this shot right now. Like we're under a full stack. We've got the same look that we were working underneath that I set up in that other timeline a minute ago. We're under my friend JP's badass 2499 output transform. We've got a good looking base image. So how much is too much? How far is too far? Let's like pull up my tree here again and just start playing around with stuff. So like if I'm working my primaries, or, you know, I've got a dedicated SAT node coming up here. Let's go over to this. Like, how far should I go with this? Here's where it gets easy when you're working within my system. The burden of proof, I love using this term. It's like a geeky legal term. It basically means like guilty until proven innocent, or rather innocent until proven guilty. Like if I get arrested tomorrow for some heinous crime, the district attorney has to prove that I did it. I don't have to prove that I didn't do it. Does that make sense? The burden of proof lies on the district attorney. And that is the extent of my legal knowledge and my Kickstarter for my legal career if this whole color grading thing doesn't work out. You think I've got what it takes, guys? I'm not so sure. But my point is the burden of proof in our world, in our scenario, the burden of proof is on the thing because we already set up our pipeline. We already built our look, as we talked about a few questions ago again. So the burden of proof is on the thing. 0 is where we're at the starting point, okay? 0 or neutral or balanced is not some arbitrary point that we select after we crank a bunch of contrast and then we go, oh, is that too far or can I go even further? This is already way off center because what I'm doing when I build my look is I'm trying to define my ratio. I'm trying to define my color palette. I'm trying to define how my shadows feel, how my highlights feel. And now from this point on, I'm trying to make the smallest moves possible needed to keep the car on the road. That might be in the form of a shot that's not balanced, that needs to be balanced. That might be in the form of a shot that's overexposed, that needs to be pulled in. That might be in the form of a shot that needs a little something different than the rest of the film does. But the point is that I'm trying to do as little as possible to maintain what we established when we set the look. So that's the number one most helpful sort of like concept that you can bring to that question is like when in doubt, do less. You're like doing more and doing less are not created equal. And it's just a question of which one you like better. If you're not sure, if you're like, oh, this is kind of nice, but it's also kind of nice to do less, always do less. If anything, you can go back to your overall look and revise there and see how that applies across the entirety of your images. And if you like it, then you can make some refinements there. But the burden of proof is always on the thing, not on doing nothing. Doing nothing is always preferable to doing something if you're torn between the two. I hope that helps.
Is it possible to achieve cinematic color grade with somewhat of a consumer grade camera like the A7 IV? Not sure why guys on Instagram seem to master it, but I can never get mine to look the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. Huge part of that is like, you guys know the acronym, did they say GIGO or GIGO? I don't know. Garbage in, garbage out. A huge part of that is on the front end. It's knowing how to stimulate that sensor with what it needs. If you want like the ultra basic distillation of how to make a consumer or prosumer camera look as good as it possibly can, flood that thing with light. Hit it with lots and lots of light. That's one of the best things you can do. There might be some where like, if you're hitting it with a really high dynamic range scene and you follow my prescription and you hit it with a bunch of light, maybe you're going to get a bunch of nasty clipped highlights, in which case you're going to say, okay, Cullen prescribed a healthy helping of this medicine. I might have taken too much. Next time, I'm only going to flood it with half that amount of light or whatever. But generally speaking, you're going to be much better off hitting the sensor with too much light than too little. So that's like my extent of my DP expertise that I can give you on the front end in terms of what you capture, because that's going to be the biggest variable. It's almost like if you guys think about like back to the film days, like film has so much to teach us, not only in terms of like, oh, there's all these aesthetics that we can borrow, but there's also all these models and concepts that we can borrow, one of which we already touched on just a minute ago. Again, in our earlier question, when I talked about get that pipeline, get that look dialed, and then your grade underneath is going to feel breezy. That's film color timing. That's film grading. We shoot to a negative, we print to a chosen print, and then we make small adjustments overall to the image, red, green, and blue points. And that's enough to get us to a really, really good outcome. The reason it's enough to get us to a really good outcome is because we have that overall pipeline that's doing most of the lifting for us. So that's one example of how film can just conceptually guide what we're doing now, even if we're not doing that exact same thing or seeking that exact same aesthetic. But the example that comes to mind with what we're discussing right now is reversal film stocks. Reversal film stocks, you can get amazing, actually really, really unique images that you wouldn't be able to get any other kind of way, except with a reversal film stock. But reversal film stocks have very narrow latitude. So you've got much less margin for error. You really need to nail your exposure in camera because you're not going to be able to do much about a missed exposure. You're not going to be able to do nearly as much when you're shooting reversal as when you're shooting a traditional negative and then printing it. So there's somewhat of an analogy, I think, there with like a low quality camera like you're talking about, is you really want to hit the camera with the exact amount of light that it needs. With an Alexa or, you know, like some other high-end cinema camera, you can give it lots more light than it needs. You can starve it of light and still get kind of like valid, interesting results, right? With these lower quality cameras, that margin is lower. So you want to find that sweet spot. What can I hit that camera with? from that point forward, what's the single most impactful thing going to be to get you that outcome that you're looking for, like the videos that you're seeing on Instagram or wherever they may be? You guys know the answer. We've talked about it a bunch today already. Pipeline, pipeline, pipeline. Get that pipeline, get that path to display dialed. And then by the time you're grading, you're only making little nudges because that's all you're going to be able to do anyway. You've got such a fragile negative to deal with, if you want to think of it that way, that you're only going to be able to make incremental changes anyway. So if by the time you've got your pipeline, your color management, your look set up, all the stuff we've been talking about today, if you're at that point and you're now hoping the grade is going to save you, you're already cooked. It's never going to happen because you're not going to be able to bend that image around very much, whether it's exposure or any other attribute. You're not going to be able to like remold that baked piece of clay. You're not going to be able to like rebake that cake very well because of the nature of the negative. So you got to rely on capturing a good image, having a sound pipeline for that image. By the way, I think it's the A7S. Is it the A7S4 that we're talking about right now, Annie?
Did I have that? Yes, that's right.
One of the A7S cameras, my buddy here at CKC just told me they released support for in-camera LUTs on. I think it's probably the one you're talking about. That's another huge part of your recipe for success for gathering the image that you want. Shoot through a viewing LUT that represents your creative intent. How do you create that viewing LUT? What is that viewing LUT born from? It's born from the pipeline you decide that you want. Now you're aiming at a target, right? I think it's one of the meanest things that we do to cinematographers and anybody trying to capture images in 2025 is we say, okay, go gather data. What kind of data? We don't know. You won't be able to tell from the camera very well. It's just an abstract data collection exercise, and then we'll tell you how well you collected it, or you'll find out yourself how well you collected it when you get into color graded later. That's just mean, and there's no reason for it. That's like film day stuff. We don't need that constraint today. So you want to be shooting through a what I call high context viewing transform that represents that exact pipeline that you wish to use when you get into the color grade. Okay, that's a bunch of thoughts. I feel like I could go even further on that, but that's plenty for this portion in grade school today. Hope that helps.
Okay, what is the mindset that you get into when you grade? Do you already imagine it in your head, or is it textbook?
This is a good question. You know, when we were doing our orientation calls for CCA this week, let me go back to the camera for a minute since we're just talking about ideas, not as much about resolve. A similar question came up, like, how do you get into the zone when you're grading? So this is my answer there, I think is going to help illuminate this. One thing that I find really helpful with grading, at least at the start of a session, is to find a way to get into my body and into what's happening right now. Not what's going to happen in an hour, not what I had for breakfast, or, you know, like the dishes that I didn't have time to do when I left the house, like right now, like being in that moment. And then also getting into my physical body. I mentioned in that orientation call that I just talked about, my step pad that I have here and at my office away from the house. Those really help with that, as well as like just dumb things like moving my body, like do 25 push-ups or whatever it is, just something to like feel my heartbeat, feel my body and my relationship to my body, and feel the moment that I'm in right now. That's like a number one, such a good prescription for like getting yourself in the right frame for doing really good color grading work. And then if we talk more practically, more hands-on about the way that I am sort of my mental model when I'm color grading, it's reactive. It's very, very reactive. It is not proactive. I'm setting the table in a proactive way using a bunch of the principles we've already talked about today. Also some of the principles that we talked about in our last episode of grade school. I've got a very particular, very prescribed, very proactive process in terms of how I set the table for myself. But from that point forward, I'm reacting. I'm responding to the image. I'm looking at opportunities that I can see. I'm looking at distractions that I feel like I can minimize and responding to what I see. And the fundamental sort of like aspect of that to me is if we're in a responsive mode, if there's nothing for me to respond to, I don't do anything. So I'm out of this mode of obligation or like, oh, I'm on a new shot, so I have to do a new thing. And instead I'm just responding. So if I don't see anything that I'm excited about or see anything that's distracting me, my move will be, okay, nothing. Like I will usually in my process, like if we look at let's go back into Resolve here for a second. Here would be my process. Like this shot is probably a pretty good example of how this would go. Like if I land on this shot, I don't have a lot to say about this shot. Like it looks pretty darn good. I've got a look in place that I like, and I haven't done anything else. Let me just reset these primaries. There we go. So like, what am I going to do in a situation like this? Well, I won't say always. Typically, I'm going to just nudge my exposure up or down and just see where it lands if I swing it open and then swing it shut. And if it nets out to right where I was, then that's a pretty good cue that I was in a good spot. Or if it changes, then it'll change a little bit. In this case, it's going to be almost exactly where it started. And then I'll do the same thing with my contrast ratio. You can do that lots of different ways, but I'm typically going to do contrast pivoting around mid-gray. I'm sort of doing this slightly differently than I really do in my practice because I'm using more custom tools, but same principle applies. Swing that exposure 2 directions just to see, nudge that contrast 2 directions just to see, and here's where I net out to on this shot. Like very little adjustment. It's really just me responding via some prescribed channels, if that makes sense. But at a baseline, if I land on a shot and I do those adjustments and they kind of land right back at 0 or at unity, I'll go, okay, great. I don't have anything to say about that. And of course, I'm usually working with clients, so they are going to have something to say usually if I don't. But I'm in that mode of like reacting, responding. What does this say to me? If it doesn't say anything to me, I'm very comfortable with that. And I'll wait for either the client to have a note, or if we all agree, dude, this just looks awesome, I got 0 problem saying, okay, cool. I know what to do with that. Next clip, moving on, right? So that's to me the most beneficial, low stress, and actually like creatively potent way of moving through a color grade.
Okay, is highlight recovery a raw only option, or is there another image centric Resolve tool that does the same thing?
Yeah, there is. I mean, look, highlight recovery is kind of a misnomer. And even what it's doing, like when we were looking at these Blackmagic RAW settings before, which I assume is kind of where the question was coming from. No, I'm going to leave that here for right now. It's a little bit opaque to me, even what that's doing. I'm more just paying attention to like, are highlights being pulled back down into range and like into an area where I can grab them and further shape them in the grade. And like I said, sometimes when I do this, it can cause artifacts to turn it on. So sometimes I'll turn it off, and it often will leave it off unless I need it. I'm like, oh, there's a pinned highlight up there. I really would like to roll in a little bit, and I'm not able to move it. It's just staying when I try to grab it. So I'm going to grab that highlight recovery and try to adjust it, which by the way, like if I leave this off here, you can always on your camera raw. I don't think I have any B raw in here to demo it with, but do I have any raw? Where's all my raw shots at? Well, regardless, you can always, when you have an actual raw shot, you can go into your camera raw tab and change your settings just for that shot and tick on that highlight recovery if that's what you want to do. But yeah, highlight recovery is something that I have a video on this that's now could probably use an update 'cause it's been a year or so, but highlight recovery is all at once like a complete myth, because like if the highlights weren't captured, if they're truly clipped and gone and, like over whatever threshold, there's nothing we can do to recover them, right? Oftentimes what we're talking about with highlight recovery in like a grading context, in an image centric context, is we're talking about how we are mapping scene highlights into display highlights. Do you guys understand the difference when I say that? There's a big difference between highlights that are clipped and highlights that are not mapping as we wish them to as we move from camera into display. Because remember, even in HDR, the dynamic range of our display is way lower than the dynamic range of real life. By the way, did everybody get a chance to check out my friend Steve Yedlin's new video called Debunking HDR? Highly recommend this. Annie, if you're able to grab a link for that and drop it in the chat, it's on yedlin.net, and it's like, yedlin.net/debunking HDR or something like that. But if you guys haven't had a chance to check it out and you want a geek fest for like 2 hours and some great insights and ideas on some of what I'm talking about right now, highly recommend checking that out. But back to the point here of highlight recovery, really what we're talking about most of the time when we're talking about highlight recovery is changing the way that our highlights are mapped. I've got a tool for this that is custom that I use and we're going to be using in the Color Square Accelerator this weekend. But if I were to do it natively here inside of Resolve, like let's look at, like this fixture up here is a pretty good example. There's not like detail in there necessarily that I want to recover. Although I say that, let's actually find out. Let's just swing the exposure in. So interestingly, do you guys know what I mean when I refer to a pinned highlight earlier? This is the opposite of a pinned highlight because there's gradient emerging as I roll this in. It's not just staying a solid field of white that turns gray. So this highlight, remarkably, actually there is information in here. In this case, I don't even care about that so much. I just want to give it a stronger shoulder. I just want to roll it in more so that it's not hitting as high in the waveform or in the histogram of my output. So like, check out where that's hitting. I think that's this right here, if I had to guess. So how can we roll that in gracefully? How can we do highlight recovery in that context? Here's how I would do it within like Resolve Native Tools. You could pull a qualifier. You could use your HDR zones. But one of the best ways to do it that's at least as good as those, I think better, and it's going to be better for clarifying and simplifying your concept of what you are actually doing, is to use your curves. Okay? So even if you don't do this every time, this is a great way to learn and get comfortable with what we're fundamentally doing in these situations. So here's what I'm going to do. This is going to be at the very top end. So what I want to define is an area of this line that I wish to bend. If I pick too small of an area, I'm not going to have enough effect and it's going to feel weird. And in the case of Resolve's curves, it's going to bend the wrong side of the line, which drives me crazy about Resolve's curves. Don't get me started on that. But if we look at, I'm forcing another control point there to kind of like keep it from changing, like all that's really doing is I have to do another control point still to say, no, really Resolve, don't change anything except what I want you to change. That's not really having any effect. And it's also a very harsh sort of narrow correction. So one way we could look at this is why am I seeing red only? Let's reset this and try it again. So one easy way to do this is to just drop everything down. Pop quiz, what am I doing here? What operator am I mimicking or emulating right now by just dragging my single highest control point and dropping it down? Someone let me know in the chat. I'm still getting a sense for like how much latency we have here with our live, but yeah, someone let me know. What operator am I doing right now? Yeah, there we go. John nailed it. Exactly. So we're doing gain right now. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set this gain like just a little bit down like this. And now if I hold Option, I'm going to be constraining the portion of the curve where this operation is happening. And again, because Resolve's curves are dumb, I need to do a second Option clicked control point to make sure that I'm truly hugging the line below that spot. So I'm now starting to shape out a narrower region where I'm having my effect. And I'm just going to start working this down. And what I'm doing is putting a shoulder on this image. And you may have to continue to pin control points to ensure that you're really getting things locked below the part of the curve where you're trying to kind of bend things. But if you look at what I've got now, this is going to be tough to spot over YouTube. But you can see I'm starting to pull that in. And I can probably go further with this. Again, I want to go as long as I possibly can with this curve without beginning to affect areas of the image that I don't want to affect, things like her face. So if we go more like this, now we're really starting to control this and get much more of that matte finish on that highlight. You guys see what I mean? That's very localized, and this may not be the prettiest curve in the world yet, but with a little finesse, we could definitely get it to a better spot, something like that. And now I've just got this really gentle curve, which, by the way, any other way we would tackle this, like with our HDR zones or with our qualifier and gaining down within a qualified zone, all of that is best expressed, best understood. It's like ground truth is actually a curve. Does that make sense? I feel like we could deep dive into that. Maybe we will deep dive into that in just a second. But the place to learn this concept that I'm talking about, it's 100% in the curves, because it's going to teach you what are the variables in this problem that I'm trying to solve. The variables are how far down am I dropping my nonlinear area, and how large is that area? How quickly am I trying to make a change in the top end of the image? So that would be one way of looking at highlight recovery, of kind of trimming in your highlights, if that makes sense. And you can see here, I've now got a very localized solution that's still very broad and gentle and smooth, because if it wasn't, my curves would reflect it. My curves would look too narrow and ugly. Hope that's some helpful ideas.
Okay, here's one. I says, I read some time ago on Live Gamma Gain a comment from Tom Poole regarding film emulation, where he said he creates 3 nodes, and on the third he says, I use a LUT I developed that basically emulates a film curve, not chroma. And on the second node, he adds one of his print emulation LUTs. My question would be, can you explain this not chroma film curve? And if the second node uses a print emulation, should this be chroma only or both?
Yeah, this is it. So this is like a famous post of Tom's. I know the post you're talking about well. I love that he just like turned up in the middle of a conversation, and if I'm remembering correctly, kind of dunked on at least some of the rabbit holes that people were going down. He's like, well, here's how I do it. So I can speak certainly to the chroma only. Here's how I interpret that. I haven't actually had the chance to like ask Tom about this specifically, but I'm pretty confident what he's saying is this. You've basically got like, let's see if I can give you guys a live demo. So here would be, let's use like one of our stock Resolve LUTs here. So I actually used to have one of these already set up in here, but I don't have it at the moment. So I'm going to open this up in my Finder, and then I'm going to open it up in Lattice. So quick geeky deep dive for all of us. Film print LUTs have 2 sort of dimensions to them. They've got the curves that we're looking at right here, right? But there's also all this 3D stuff. So like quick summary for anyone who I'm like dropping you into the deep end of the swimming pool and you're like, whoa, what are you showing me? What's happening right now? So think about it this way. LUTs on their most basic level can be a 1D LUT, or in this case, to be more specific about it, a 1 by or a 3 by 1D LUT. So I've got these 3 1D LUTs that are telling me what to do to my red channel, what to do to my green channel, and what to do to my blue channel. Each of those channels and the LUTs for each of those channels, you can see I've got a blue channel, a green channel, and a red channel LUT. They have no idea what the other is doing. They don't even know that the other one exists. All they know is I'm receiving this input and I'm modulating it in the following way to produce this output. They're seeing things basically in black and white in a single channel. That's the 1D, the curves side of the LUT. But in a film LUT, there's all this complex color stuff happening on the cube side. And you can see that represented here. And that basically says, I'm not just going to modify my input based on what it is in terms of its red, or what it is in terms of its green, or what it is in terms of its blue, but in terms of what it is in terms of its red, green, and blue, where it is in 3D space within this cube. If that sounds confusing, it is fundamentally confusing. It's a lot to bite off. But the idea is that you've got these 2 aspects. The one aspect, this 1D side, this is basically just going to give you contrast. This side, the cube side, this is going to give you color transformation. If you want to change saturation or you want to change hue, you will never be able to do it here. It requires this. Okay? So that's like the context. That's the way any film LUT, the way any viewing LUT in general is going to work. So what Tom is talking about when he says no chroma is something that I can do really easily here on this program called Lattice, which by the way is a great program if you're a geek and you want to mess around with LUTs and do stuff like I'm about to do. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say isolate contrast. Watch what happens to this cube. Now the cube is uniform except for the redistribution of values that is arising from the curve. And if I now save this, and I'm going to call this 1D only. Okay? And I'm going to refresh. And let's just go all the way here and compare the 2. So we're going to tee this up. This is a fun opportunity also to look at like, oh, how can I use these built-in Resolve film LUTs in a fundamentally sound way? Some of you guys have seen this before, but it'll be a good refresher for you and maybe something brand new for some of you guys. We're going to do a color space transform. This is at my timeline level of my node graph. I'm assuming I'm already in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. That's what I'm in this space. So input color space, DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate, output color space, ACES, output gamma, linear. What's he doing? It wasn't looking great. Now it's looking even worse. Where is this guy taking me? Stick with me. So we're going to say we're going to ACES and we're going to use white point adaptation. Next, we are going to use an ACES transform. We're going to take no input transform as our input. Confusingly enough, in an ACES transform, what this means when I say no input transform, what I mean is assume an input of ACES linear. Okay? Output transform, we are going to go to a really cool thing that is unique to ACES. It's the reason why I'm doing this whole ACES excursion that we're going on right now. We're going to go into a metric called ADX. That stands for Academy Density Exchange. This was devised as a measurable metric for dealing with film elements, specifically for dealing with film negative elements, for input mapping them into a color management pipeline. In our case, we are going to move into that metric with the idea that this is a fundamentally more sound thing to do than what a lot of you guys have probably seen done before for teeing things up for a film transform, which is just a color space transform into Rec 709 Cineon. That's not really correct because that film LUT is definitely not expecting Rec 709 as its input. It's expecting film primaries. Film primaries are slippery little worms, but we're at least trying to nail those film primaries with ADX as opposed to like just explicitly going with the wrong answer right off the bat. Like it's definitely not Rec 709. Film primaries are hard to like exactly quantify, but they're definitely not just Rec 709, right? So this is going to get us to a fundamentally better spot than if we just do that old Rec 709 Cineon thing. So here we're teeing up for it, and let's start with the baseline thing. And let's even do this. Let's look at something boring where we're going to get a look at some different colors and things like that. So here's a good example. Like here's a nice filmic rendering. Like, by the way, this looks really nice, this 2383 having been teed up properly, doesn't it? It's like a pretty sound rendering. But now let's compare to what we just teed up using the method that Tom described. So now we're going to do the 1D only. So you can see here the difference between the two. If I wipe between them, the first thing that stands out to me is the density changes, right? Like you can see in the 3D, more saturated stuff is getting more colorful, right? Can I take this full screen for you guys? Still wipe? Yeah. So here's your 1D only. Here's your film stuff or your 3D stuff. 1D, 3D. 1D, 3D. So I'm pretty confident Tom is talking about using this as his baseline. And then there's some other voodoo in there that I don't have committed to memory that you alluded to as well. But the big question of like, what does he mean when he says a film curve set that I devised without the chroma? That fundamentally, this is what he's talking about. I'm pretty sure anyway. I haven't asked him yet, so I could be off on that, but I'm pretty confident based on the context that he's describing and what I know of his workflow from having heard about it previously, that that's what he's talking about. I hope that unlocks a little bit of mystery for you. That's a great thread. Do us a favor, actually, link us, whomever asked that question, drop a link to that thread here in the chat. It's a great thread to read through in its entirety, both for the good ideas and the bad ideas, the good information and the bad information that emerges. And the stuff that Tom shares is gold, in my opinion, because Tom is a phenomenal colorist and he's got some great ideas that he very generously shares in that conversation.
Okay, Keller wants to know what's a recent rabbit hole you've gone down.
What's a recent rabbit hole? Saturation and thinking about it at the grading level. I think about saturation a lot at the look level, or I have thought about it a lot at the look level lately, but thinking about it more at the grading level is definitely a thing that I've been doing a lot lately. I don't have anything really tangible to show. All the rabbit holes that I've gone down, I mean, Kaur will appreciate this because he's a fellow geek and coder and tool developer. they all involve some amount of coding and like monkeying around with interesting stuff. So I would say saturation, that's one of them. The other big one has been like this one I've talked about at least a little bit before. You guys know, like, so here I'm at home today, but at my office, I've got the advanced panels, which I've had for a little while now. And there's something that bothers me a lot more about when I sit down to those advanced panels. Like when I grade here at home, I'm grading on almost an entirely custom set of DCTLs. Like there's very little like Resolve native tools that I'm using for my basic operations. Most of that's happening from my custom tools. And I manipulate those custom tools with my my pots that are at the top of my mini panel here. For whatever reason, that doesn't bother me as much as when I'm on the advanced panel and I spend the entire day reaching up and above these 4 massive wheels that I have available without ever touching them. It's gotten to a point where it really bothers me. So the other like ongoing rabbit hole that I'm going down is like, how can I use those things? How can I incorporate those into my workflow by either changing their behavior or changing my thinking so that I can use or like leverage their behavior in a way that works for my creative goals. So that's another one that's just an open-ended exploration without anything particularly juicy to show you guys. But those are some of the rabbit holes that I've gone down lately. What rabbit holes have you guys gone down lately? Let me know in the chat.
Okay, how do you tackle gamma shifts for web delivery? Do you adapt your grade for cross-platform consistency?
Great question. This is a big one that I really think can be simplified way more than we make it. I'm going to give you guys like this simple principle as your baseline. So I'm trying to think of a way to even explain this idea in a simple way. There is an idea that is a legacy idea in image mastering that's quite prevalent, that basically says, if you are grading, I'm not in a dark room right now. I got the lights on so that you guys can see me, but let's pretend that this room has the lights set to the way I set it up when I'm actually grading. It's a dark room, right? And you're in a dark surround is what they would call that. There's this convention that says, well, if you're grading in a dark surround and you are mastering to Gamma 2.4, let's just go back to JP's cool 2499 here. And I'm going to pull up my contour, get my look back in place here. So the convention is like, all right, if you are grading in Gamma 2.4, which is what I am, my monitor is calibrated for Gamma 2.4, I'm targeting Gamma 2.4, I'm grading in Gamma 2.4 right now. This convention says, if you're grading in a dark surround in Gamma 2.4 and you are creating deliverables that are going to go out to a Gamma 2.2 monitor, the best thing to do, assuming that Gamma 2.2 monitor is going to have a brighter surround, the best thing to do is nothing, because that image is going to be reproduced on that Gamma 2.2 monitor a little bit brighter than what you saw in the dark room. And as a result, it's going to have a better chance of competing with that brighter surround. That's like a very prevalent idea. And if you're confused by what I just said, then I am with you. I was confused by that for a really long time. Want to know why? Because it's confusing. It is needlessly confusing. I'm going to give you guys a much simpler principle that you can adhere to 100% of the time that is going to simplify this whole aspect of gamma shift a lot. Here's the principle. Whatever your monitor's gamma is, you encode that gamma, always. That's like the simple baseline that will get you out of so much trouble and stop your brain from turning like making pretzels of like thought in your brain. Just encode for whatever the decode of your camera is, or of your display is, rather. That like harks back to a concept that I talk about all the time of net linear. What's the whole point of this whole imaging pipeline of capturing the image and putting it into a camera and log encoding it and stripping off the log, going through the color management and spitting it out to display? We're trying to get back to a fundamentally linear reproduction, at least in the middle, in the body of the image. That way we recognize it because that's the domain of the real world. If I was looking at this person's face in the real world, it would be presented to me in linear ratios of light. So if the middle portion of the image especially is not presented to my eye coming off of the monitor in linear ratios of light, I will have a lot of trouble. It's not going to make sense to my eyes, right? So we're always seeking that net linear. And one of the ways that we get net linear at the end of the chain is we apply let me get my acronyms right here. We are going to apply our OET or our EOTF, our electro-optical transfer function, followed by our OETF, our optoelectrical transfer function. Or I'm not actually getting. I'm introducing terms I don't need to at this point. We're going to apply gamma, which is going to be 1 over a 2.4, because the display is going to apply a power of 2.4. They're going to cancel each other out. That's the point. If we just adhere to that principle, we will avoid so much difficulty. So what does that mean for web deliverables? What that means for web deliverables, what are most displays that are going to watch YouTube content or other web content on going to be set to? They're going to be set to gamma 2.2 or sRGB, which is basically gamma 2.2 with a weird behavior in the very bottom end that can't be described in a simple gamma number. So gamma 2.2 is what we should target for web deliverables. Full stop. That's it. The only other caveat that I'm going to throw in there to you guys, like these are the two pieces that cause like 90% of this like intractable ongoing debate about gamma shift. The two issues that if you solve these, you're going to basically be solved except for specific edge cases. Number one, encode what you will be decoding. So if you are going to a gamma 2.2 display, encode for that gamma 2.2 display. What that means for me is we do generate a different web deliverable. If this is going to web, going to YouTube, that's a different encode than if we're going to broadcast, which is gamma 2.4 versus a gamma 2.2. That's number one. Here's the other big one that's going to save you so much trouble if you just adhere to it. Grade on an accurate monitor. That's it. Like so much of the gamma shift issue and the reason why the gamma shift issue gets so difficult and confusing is because you have a scenario in which you are grading on an inaccurate monitor. The monitor is not actually accurate to the color space that you are targeting in your color management. And then you look at that image that you graded on an inaccurate monitor and you wonder why it doesn't look the same on a different inaccurate monitor. Well, there's two reasons for that. It's because you graded on an inaccurate monitor and now you're looking at a different kind of wrong. It's an impossible problem at that point because you've got two variables in play and it's impossible to know which one of them is contributing how much to the problem of like, this doesn't look like what I wanted it to look like. So if you can control one of those variables, we're going to talk about this again in the Colors Career Accelerator this weekend. If you can control one of those variables, calibrate your display. I swear to you guys, like this sounds crazy because of how much debate we all hear about this. Work on a calibrated display, encode for the display that you are targeting. I swear to you, that will solve 90% of these gamma shift issues that we're all talking about. There's all kinds of edge cases about like how browsers and OSs and things like QuickTime interpret metadata tags and how things like Apple's ColorSync interpret metadata tags and how all of those overlay onto the system. But those are all edge cases. Like fundamentally, if you target gamma 2.2 and your image was right, or rather the image you were looking at was accurate in the first place, most of these gamma shift issues will magically disappear. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk about gamma shift. I'm very passionate about this in case you can't tell, because it's driven me crazy for a long time until I finally realized like, oh, this is basically about having an accurate monitor and not trying to game the system actually with tags or with an intentionally mismatched encode decode of gamma. So hopefully there's some helpful big principles in there, even if you didn't follow all of the geekery that I dove into in between. Okay, guys, that's a great place to wrap. Thank you all a bunch. This was a really fun sesh. How did you guys like doing old school AMA format? Was this fun? It was fun for me. Let me know in the chat. Let me know. Good sesh? Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not so sure I agree with you there, Carson. ColorSync, you have to remember, ColorSync isn't here to harm us, it's here to help. And most of the time it actually is helping. Like the number one prescription that I give to clients who are viewing stuff remotely and we want to give them an accurate image, watch it on an iPad. Those things are incredibly accurate. That's ColorSync at work. That's ColorSync doing its job. So we got to remember that it's something we need to partner with, not try to fight. Even if it doesn't perform perfectly in all situations. Like, by the way, I'm using it right now on this system because it doesn't behave perfectly when it's interpreting. When I say gamma 2.2, it doesn't perfectly interpret that. I have to use this macOS viewing transform that I've talked with you guys about before. So I'm not saying it's flawless. It's definitely not, but it's there to help and it's doing more help than harm. We just have to figure out when it's not doing help, what we can do to get the result that we're looking for. All right, gang. Yeah, Darren knows. The iPad Pro, remote work. It's great. All right, gang. That's it for today. Y'all are awesome. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for doing a fun AMA. Thanks to Annie for co-hosting with me. See you guys super soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.